Hi, Ryan.
Hey there, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All good, all good.
Hi, Heather.
Hello, how
Hey,
are
Heather.
you?
I am good.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey there.
Suddenly got to be winter all of a sudden. It is November.
Yeah, I had to rush to shut down my mom's house for the season up in New Hampshire because we have to drain the water so it doesn't freeze. And I was counting on another week or two before I had to worry about freezing, but I looked at the temperatures on Sunday and realized that it was below 30 for like 24 hours in the low 20s. And so I kind of panicked and got a neighbor to go and shut the water off and open the pipes, and then had somebody come up and finish the job of draining it for the season on Monday. They were very kind and did not charge me an arm and a leg for doing it last minute.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
Is that where you're from, Roberta? Are you from New Hampshire?
I'm from Pennsylvania actually, but it's my grandmother's house in New Hampshire that belongs to my mother in Pennsylvania. So I I manage it for her when she's not there.
Got it.
I just want to let you all know that I mean, I hope that this is not going to be a longer than usual meeting this evening. I think we can probably um, keep to our normal routine, but in case we did end up running long, I have a hard stop at 8:45 this evening. So I've got to pick a kid up at the airport later. So
Okay.
I think we shouldn't have any trouble meeting that schedule. We usually try to finish in less than that.
Yeah. Well, it's something to shoot for sure.
Yeah.
And there's not that many applications really to run through. So
Yeah. You all don't have to vote on all the applications this evening if you don't feel ready to. But we'll get to that when we start the meeting. One, two, three, four, five. There's five of you. You just have a quorum, but I expect we'll have another few people.
okay, let's just wait another minute or two and then we'll get started. All right, well, maybe we'll get started. We have a quorum.
Mhm.
Okay. So I will just kick it off by saying welcome to the November 15th, 2023 Community Preservation Act Committee meeting. And pursuant to Chapter 2 in the Acts of 2023, this meeting, the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted via remote participation. And there will be a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. Do we have members of the public here tonight?
Um, Let me see. I do not believe so, but I will look at the part. Yeah, we do not.
Okay. Well, welcome to members of the public who joined us this evening. Um, Are they applicants or are they guests?
No, I said we do not have any.
Oh, we do
members
not
of the
have any.
public.
Okay. All right. And with that, I guess we'll do a quick roll call.
All right, Ryan
Present.
and Heather is here. You just introduced the meeting. Eric,
Yep, I'm here, present.
John,
Present.
Rose,
Present.
Laura,
Present.
Joe.
Here.
All right, and I think we're missing David and Jahan. Right now, we'll see if they join us.
So I guess we have a fairly short agenda tonight. I'll just read it out to you guys and then we'll work on it. So we have approval of the meeting minutes. We're gonna review the CPA fall report, which is in the folder. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that. And then we're going to deliberate on the funding requests, this year's grantees. We can either approve them tonight and make recommendations to the conditions, or we have it scheduled in our December meeting to continue the deliberation and to approve all recommendations at that meeting. So we can kind of see how that goes. And then a short other business. We would like to wrap up tonight's meeting by 8:30. Just because Roberta has a hard stop. She has to get on the road at 8:30. So we will do our best to honor that. So with that, the approval of the meeting minutes, does anyone have any comments or corrections to make to the October 25th meeting minutes? Yeah, I do not.
No.
I just
All
want
right.
to take one moment to acknowledge that Jahan and David have arrived in the meeting, and there is now one member of the public who has joined, who's, to answer your question earlier, not one of the grantees.
Okay, all right.
And to that person, you can feel free to message us if you'd like to be acknowledged, if you have a question for the committee. So that we were looking for a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll make that.
All right,
I can second that.
all right. Motion by Laura, seconded by Ryan, and I will call the roll. Ryan,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
John.
Do I abstain because I wasn't present for the last meeting?
You don't have to. You're basically acknowledging that the minutes were received.
Okay, yes.
Rose,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
and Joe.
Yes.
All right. It's approved. Thank you all. So I will run through the fall report. I thought I had opened it, but I'm having an issue with Word at the moment. Let me see if I can start over. My apologies. Every now and then, documents don't appear on my screen when I open them. It says it's open, and I can't actually access it. So I'm going to shut everything down and try again.
Do you want me to share it on my screen?
Let me try one more time, and if I can't do it, then I will have you share it.
Okay.
All right, this time it worked. Okay, then I will share screen. And so the fall report is essentially a forecast of what is the funding availability that the CPC can draw from this funding round, as well as an attempt to look ahead at how are the grants that you've already funded recently? What is the status of those grants, which might give a sense of the capacity that some of the applicants have for carrying out another round of grants, as well as looking ahead at do we have any idea of what off-cycle applications might be ahead of you that you want to keep in mind? So the report begins by looking at the funds that were budgeted in this funding round. So this spring, we estimated that the revenue for FY24 would be $3,283,713. And based on the formula that is partly derived from the legislation and partly Somerville CPC's determination in the spring, you approved the annual CPA plan update, which just determined what was the allocation that you wanted to divide between the 3 program areas and to save in the budgeted reserve to use for any of the programs. So you reserved the maximum 5% for administration, and you elected to put half of the current year's revenue into community housing. I'm going to turn the paragraph markers off for you, and then divide the other two 15% for historic resources and 20% for open space and recreation, leaving 10% in the budgeted reserve, which is your flexible fund that can be used in any of the eligible program areas. So taking out the debt service that we've already committed to through bonded projects from the past, the right-hand column represents the total available funds from the current year's revenue. So there is also, so every year, the revenue that has not been appropriated yet goes into what's called the undesignated fund balance, which is CPA money that just hasn't been appropriated, hasn't been set aside. And this is every year, there are a few ways that we add to the undesignated fund balance. First of all, we always make a point of making conservative estimates of the revenue every year. We want to avoid going over appropriating more money than is actually going to be available. Some of you may recall last year we overestimated the state match and had to take the balance out of the undesignated fund to be able to fill in because we couldn't run at a deficit. So we had to fill in the amount that we had appropriated and exceeding the actual revenue. We haven't actually found out yet what the state match is going to be this year. We haven't received that yet. We anticipate that it's going to be just about what we estimated in the spring. The state has indicated that that was an accurate projection, but we don't actually have the money in hand yet. So that may be a few dollars different. But anyway, we have the actual assessment revenue that was received and some other miscellaneous revenues added up to some $97,282. And then taking away the overestimated state match that was subtracted from the undesignated fund balance last year. That leaves $60,997 in unappropriated FY 23 revenue added to the undesignated fund balance. And in addition to that, every year, the unspent administrative funds are rolled back into the undesignated fund balance. So out of the 5% that we set aside last year, we didn't spend all of it. $90,000 was returned to the undesignated fund balance. And the unspent budgeted reserve funds also are rolled back into the undesignated fund balance, but we used the entire budgeted reserve last year, so there weren't any funds left over from that. So the total that was added to the undesignated fund balance last year was $151,000. So last year, the committee also elected to spend down you had been carrying a significant amount in the undesignated fund balance last year. So because the requests for funding well exceeded the current year's revenue, the committee elected to spend funds from the undesignated fund balance to be able to cover all of the projects that you wanted to fund last year. So that those are listed in table 3, and the total that you spent was $470,155.
Roberta,
Yes.
what's the difference between the unspent budgeted funds that we did spend down and the undesignated funds?
So the unspent budgeted funds were appropriated last year from the current year's revenue.
Mhm.
Whereas the undesignated funds have never been appropriated. It's just miscellaneous revenue.
They're not earmarked for a particular category
I'm
versus
gonna-
earmarked funds that went unspent.
So actually, I'm going to skip ahead a section. It's kind of always hard to decide how to organize the report. Maybe I want to reverse it later, but I'm going to skip ahead and talk about the funds. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to go present in the order that I prepared the report. So just switching gears a little bit based on the amount that was added to the undesignated fund balance this year. So in prior years, the CPC every fall has undertaken a practice of what was called budget fixing, which means that you looked at what the unspent, what was added to the undesignated fund balance last year, and you appropriated a share for each of the program areas equivalent to the percentage that you had decided on in the annual plan, and then appropriated that to the reserve so that you always maintained so that any revenue that was received, either that had been budgeted or revenue that hadn't been budgeted, would all be divided into those categories according to those percentages. And I gave some thought as I was preparing this report this year and wanted to propose a change to the committee this year. And this is a draft report. So if you want to, this is an area for discussion if you disagree with my methodology. But I was thinking that the amount, so that it's $90,000 that you need to, it's actually only $60,000 of revenue plus the $90,000 that was not that was rolled back from the administrative expenses. So it would be a small amount of money to divide between all of the program areas, and it's you have control over choosing to spend funds for historic preservation or open space and recreation according to need. So perhaps the committee would like to keep the undesignated fund completely flexible with respect to historic preservation or open space and recreation, and you can just use, tap into those funds whenever there's a project that meets a need in those two categories. But with respect to affordable housing, you are not the one who is spending those funds. So for affordable housing, it would be helpful to actually continue with the budget fixing and appropriate the 50% of that revenue into the affordable housing category. So my recommendation for you to discuss is that you apply the additional, so 50% of the additional undesignated fund balance apply to the housing reserve, and then increase the recommended housing trust appropriation by $75,000 above what had been budgeted this spring. So figure 1 represents the total amount with that adjustment that would be used for projects or available for projects this year. 656,000 for open space and recreation, 362,000 for historic reserve, 328,000 for budgeted reserve, and 1.4 million for the adjusted community housing reserve. So then so that above analysis all pertain to the current year's revenue. And so I also wanted to bring out funds carried over from prior years. So the funds carried over from prior years include that undesignated fund balance that we've been talking about that's accumulated over years. And in addition to that, you have funds left over in the open space and recreation reserve and the historic preservation reserve. And I learned through some, I wasn't sure until this week, I learned that you actually can use any funds that are returned, closed out of projects that go back to either the open space and recreation or the historic preservation reserve. You can use those funds immediately. So just this year, we closed out 150,000 into the historic preservation, and 2,000 were closed out back to the open space and recreation reserve. Those are immediately available for you to use. And as we discussed earlier in the year, you've committed funds to the Art Farm project, which have not yet been approved by City Council. So continuing to subtract those out of the reserve funds and subtracting the housing adjustment out of the undesignated fund balance. This leaves an undesignated fund balance of almost $1.2 million that is available right now. And open space recreation reserve, 126,000, and the historic preservation reserve, 181,000. We did discuss last year that it is a good practice to continue carrying forward your undesignated fund balance, some amount. There's not a specific amount that you have to carry forward, but it's a good practice to carry forward undesignated funds in case of some unforeseen circumstances, so that helps to manage cash flow and provide funds for some project that may not have been foreseen. So maybe we can pause at this point and take any questions or discussion about the financial side of the annual report.
So I
I'm
just
happy-
want to,
Go ahead, Heather.
I was just gonna sort of reframe the shift that Roberta's sort of putting out there for us to discuss, which is so previously when we had to do the budget fixing, the reconciling of the budget, funds would go back to the pieces of the pie that they came from. So open space and historic preservation would receive things in their 20%, 15%, and housing at the 50%. So what's shifting here is this idea that the funds that are being returned are going actually, and all of them are going into undesignated. So we're not growing those parts of the pie with bigger and bigger numbers. We're actually growing the undesignated fund because I think in part because we've seen the usefulness of being able to break free of the pie, sometimes in response to the grant application pool of that year, or sort of the emergency fund requests that we receive that are sort of one-offs. So I think that's really kind of the primary shift. And so the question is, do we feel that it's important that we continue to grow the funds within these specific categories, or is it okay to sort of say, okay, well, we have monies in those funds carried over that are in those in each of the categories, and now we can just grow the undesignated fund because of its flexibility. Is that a fair paraphrase, Roberta?
That is, and in the past, the undesignated fund has grown anyway, I think primarily because the budgeted reserve and the administrative reserve were folded back into the undesignated fund every year, and those were never divided into the program area buckets. So that is a potential other change, is that you could go in the other direction and fold those into the bucket so that you always maintain the division that was envisioned in your plan.
Okay, great. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
like
I
I
was
said.
just gonna solicit questions. So
Okay, yeah, sure. And thanks for summarizing, Heather, and thanks, Roberta, for all your work on this. I know this is a lot. So I am trying to compare what we were just looking at over to the Excel document that's in the package, the meeting package, and I think it is every month. And I would encourage everybody, if you are not referring to it, to take a look at the fiscal year 24 CPA application evaluation document. So a lot of what I just saw makes sense and ticks and ties across. And I'm just trying to understand how these carried over funds relate to the balance that we have this fiscal year available to us. So if I'm reading it correctly, the way that it's worked from month to month is that we have our budgeted funds for this year, and we have the funds that we've awarded this year and outstanding. And that kind of leaves a balance that we are working against as we consider our options from month to month. But now I also understand that there are these carried over buckets from previous years that are allocated. It sounds like maybe that's the shift this is helpful. Thank you. So on this, if you scroll over so we can see column A, yeah, there we go. So rows, whatever it is, 18 through 25. I'm fully understanding, and I saw in the report where that thought process was coming from in rows 18 through 25, where we kind of see what we've been allocated this year, what we've spent, what's outstanding, and how we fund whatever's left over. like we go down to rows 28 through 32, that's where we're talking about the carried over funds, right? So it sounds like the carried over funds that are in each of these buckets, open space, recreation, historic preservation, those we have not really been thinking about those as funds available to us as we evaluate proposals this year. Is that right?
That is correct. So I have, this actually is rocket science. It doesn't, I'm trying to make it sound simple, but
I know it's tough.
yeah, it's taken a very long time to understand exactly where the money is coming from and when and where it goes and what pieces you're allowed to use at what time. And so I have just unlocked another level this week to understand that all of the funds, all of the funds that are listed as carried over in the open space, recreation, and historic preservation categories are available right now. So I had a question mark in my brain up until now about whether some of those funds had to be held and not touched for a year or two after they went into those accounts. And I've learned that they do not. So anything that goes into the undesignated actually does have to be held for a year or two after it goes into that account. That's one of the reasons why we need to maintain a balance for cash flow purposes, because it includes some old money and new money has to sit there until it gets old before you're allowed to use it, essentially. But that's not true of the open space, recreation, and historic preservation. So where in the previous months, I had not included these as available funds that you could spend right now, but in fact they are. So in the analysis as it is right now, the total request versus what is the difference between the available revenue and the total request. The total available includes both the budgeted and the carried over reserves for open space and historic preservation. So that is that's a change in this analysis since last month.
Helpful. Okay. And then I'm just gonna ask a follow-up question if that's all right, then I'll stop talking. So so I heard it in the conversation that there's money that has been allocated or money that has been awarded to projects but not yet drawn. That's one bucket. And then the other is funds that have never been allocated and just rolled over from a previous year. Where do I see those two different buckets in this reconciliation?
Yeah. So in the it's in the spreadsheet, the amount that is shown as being carried over is in column B. So in the open space recreation category, 494,000 is sitting in the open space reserve right now. But we know that we've committed $367,000 to Art Farm. That doesn't show up anywhere officially. That's just, we know that we've made that commitment. And if City Council were to approve that recommendation next month, we would need to have this money available. So as long as that is, as long as that's undecided by City Council, we just need to keep plugging that number in ourselves to our analysis of the available funding.
Okay. So does that mean that's the only project that we have approved but has not drawn funding yet?
Okay, that's the only project. So what happens is that each time we approve a project, the money for that project gets put into its own account. So that is each project has a dedicated account, which has already been subtracted from the reserve fund. So what is in this column is what's sitting in the reserve fund, not attached to a project.
Understood. So no already committed funds from previous years are included anywhere on this workbook. Is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Okay. That was my knowledge gap. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else have any
So-
questions? I mean,
so-
I guess the other thing to stress is that we don't have the state match yet. So if we were to have overestimated what we thought that match might be, then we would have to correct the match like we did last year. And I don't think that would happen. Last year, there was, as you might remember, sort of a whole sort of crisis on the state level with budgeting, and a number of funds got held up. But so we won't know until they release those numbers, and we hope to have it for the November meeting, but it's not here yet. So hopefully we'll have it by the December meeting, because we would really like to have that all pulled together before we grant this year's awards, finalize the grants. But how do people feel about sort of the proposal of rolling things over into undesignated?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, to me, it feels like it gives us some flexibility, which is nice. Like it reminds me of general operating expenses category rather than a program category. You know, when you get a grant. So as a grant writer, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that the undesignated bucket is like general op, and that gives the grantee, or in this case, the CPC, a lot of flexibility as to how to designate and earmark the money. You know, the thing to keep in mind is the percentages that we came up with based on input from citizens, right? And so we don't want to stray really far from that, right? And just kind of remain true to our mission and what people want. I mean, I guess I would just say go forward with that in mind, and take advantage of the flexibility, because there's all those off cycle applications that we get. And so, you know, and often they're like the applicants are in some kind of crisis or emergency situation. They need the money quickly, and it's really warranted, you know, when they come to us. So having that that undesignated bucket there is going to be really helpful. I know it, because I've seen it play out in years past. And those are my thoughts.
I completely agree. Flexibility was this exact word that I wanted to use, because I just feel like giving us that flexibility to use the money where the demand kind of rises up would be very helpful for us in the future.
So, but to be clear though, we already have almost 1.3 million in an undesignated fund, right? Which we can allocate any way we want. And so actually I'm more comfortable keeping them in the buckets they're in order to maintain that kind of, you know, that the division that we, you know, had intended, you know. And so just because, you know, historical preservation project didn't come, I guess I don't want to feel like there's like a pressure to spend that money each year, or it's lost from that bucket. You know, and I think that I understand that we can always reallocate it to it, but I kind of like the idea of trying to maintain that bucket. And I think for like the open space and recreation fund in particular, you know, when we know, you know, how expensive real estate is in Somerville, and how quickly, you know, the city might need to move to make a, you know, to try and acquire property. I just kind of think it makes sense to me to keep that money.
No, actually, I think there's a misunderstanding. The question So once the money is in one of the program area reserves, the open space reserve or the historic preservation reserve, it stays there. It will only be used for its program area projects going forward. The question is about the unanticipated revenue this past year, that there was $150,000 added to the undesignated fund because of unanticipated revenue and because of unused administrative reserve that got folded back into the undesignated fund. So the question is whether that money, that
Oh.
150,000, should get divided between all three program areas or only divided to the housing area because you're going to spend it as you need between historic preservation and affordable and open space and recreation anyway.
Yeah, I did misunderstand. I thought you were talking about giving ourselves the flexibility to reallocate the carried over funds among any of the projects, types.
Right.
I don't, yeah, so I don't have any objection to that 150 going into the undesignated fund.
Yeah, I can't think of any drawback to it. From what I've seen in my brief stint here, we need to be kind of nimble and be able to do some shuffling on a minute's notice sometimes. And it seems like from year to year that the overall priority list the numbers skew pretty radically one way or another from year to year. So I think it could be good to do that.
So I definitely agree with the sentiment here. One thing I do want to mention is that sometime back, and Roberta, please remind us all again. Did we have a conversation as a committee regarding a certain threshold, certain balance that we want to keep for the undesignated allocation? Was that like a soft target, something that you could think of maybe?
Yes, you recall correctly. Last year, when the committee was considering spending a large amount of funds out of the undesignated fund balance, you had a discussion about what is the amount that you should maintain carrying forward. And I think that the committee last year agreed on a soft target of maintaining a minimum $750,000. But there isn't a hard, fast rule about what it needs to be.
Understood. Thank you so much for that reminder. So in sum, I'm certainly in agreement to allocate this to that designated because we can foresee some off-cycle applications and also certain priorities that may emerge in the next few months to next year. So it will certainly help us with respect to having the flexibility to support those applications. So thank you so much.
So unless there's any more questions or points of clarity that people need, maybe we're ready to take a vote on this? Or do we need to vote on this? Or is this?
So, two things. First, what you'll need is a vote this evening on the housing adjustment. So you'll need a vote to appropriate the, what was the amount that we said? $75,605 to the community housing reserve. And I also wanted to finish going over the second half of the report. So I don't know if you want to take care of the finances first and then look at the rest of the report or the other way around. It's up to you.
I sort of feel like we could take care of the finances first and then go on to the rest of the report.
Okay. So then what we need is a motion to recommend the transfer of $75,605 to the Affordable Housing Reserve. I'll share the screen again so that you can see the section of the analysis that shows that.
I can make that motion to transfer $75,605 to the Affordable Housing Reserve.
And this is from the undesignated fund?
From the undesignated fund. Yes. Thank
And
you,
I
John.
will, second that motion.
Thank you, Jahan. All right, and then I will actually stop sharing so I can see you all. And call the roll. David,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
and Ryan.
Yes.
Did I miss anyone? I was reading your names and they started jumping around on the list.
And so we can vote multiple times.
Don't tell the election commission. All right. Thank you all this. So the motion passes. We will transfer the make the housing reserve adjustment. So moving on to the rest of the program, the rest of the report. Located on my screen again. I'm not sure I'm sharing the right thing. Am I sharing just the?
We see your whole desktop.
That's what I thought. Share screen. There it is. It didn't show up the first time I looked. Okay. So I have obtained updates on most of the projects. I haven't heard back from the Somerville Museum or Mudflat Studio to ask about the status of the FY23 grants for those two projects. But the Somerville Museum FY22 grant is completed pending some maybe some last punch list items. They haven't yet sent their closeout report, but they are that project is very close to completion. And we're working with the Somerville Hispanic Association to move their project forward together with the ARPA funding that they received for the elevator. So you've heard about both of those projects recently because they have come to the committee in the last couple of months. The Elizabeth Peabody House structural design is nearly completed and they are preparing to retain a contractor for the windows project. Broadway House construction is nearing completion. I just had a site visit at the Broadway House a couple weeks ago and it's looking great. If you happen to be driving through East Somerville, you can see transformational improvements to that house. The Congregational Church Bell Tower is going to be waiting to resume construction in spring 2024 so that they can do the masonry work during the appropriate season. Blessing of the Bay Meadow is nearly complete. Everything has been planted. They just are going through another season of monitoring before they close out that project. And the linear park design is getting started. Henry Hansen Park is going out to bid for construction. The Glen Street Park Community Garden is under construction. Actually, they'll be having a groundbreaking next week. So I can mention that during other business, give you the information about the groundbreaking for that project. Dilboy Auxiliary Fields, the design is nearly completed. That's also getting ready to go out to bid for construction. The Brown, Healy, and West Somerville neighborhood schoolyards are complete, just having a few punch list items that need to wait until next spring to be completed. 217 Somerville Ave, the design is in progress. Somerville Junction Park is under construction. And the Kennedy Schoolyard, as we know, is anticipating to start with the FY24 grant. So that's all of the projects that are under construction or in progress right now. A few projects that we're still holding funds for is the Richardson Street Open Space Acquisition, which was a project that was in conjunction it was in conjunction with an affordable housing project by the Somerville Community Corporation. And that project may be going to fall through. It's to be determined whether they're going to be able to complete it. Given the changes in circumstances since when they first began this, 5 years ago. So we may be hearing in the near future about the outcome of that project. Either it may need to be canceled, or they may need to come and ask for approve a change from what the committee originally approved 5 years ago.
Can you remind us briefly what that was? It predates me.
Yeah, so there was a property that the Somerville Community Corporation purchased that they wanted to develop affordable housing on. And they were going to set aside a portion of that. It's a corner lot on Richardson Street, and they're going to set aside a portion of it to for open space that the city would acquire. And so the CPC was going to pay for the open space portion of the lot, and they're assembling funding and getting permitting to do the rest of the development project. But they've hit a number of snags in that plan, which is why it has taken so long for it to be executed.
So who owns it now? Like, what's the status of it as we sit here today?
The Somerville Community Corporation owns it. And right now they are holding it and trying to resolve the barriers that have prevented them from being able to move forward with it.
Okay.
It was a residential house on a very large corner lot that they were buying and developing as affordable housing. It's sort of near the Maxwell Green T station now, which has come along since they even began this whole thing.
Okay.
So the only other projects right now, like we've managed to get result, this was a longer list last year, and we've managed to move projects forward that had been stuck for a while. The only other projects that we're holding funds for are Open Space Land Acquisition Fund and a small grant that's associated with that to help with due diligence for open space acquisition. And then there's the Art Farm project that we discussed earlier. So those are the only projects that are kind of in stalled status.
Can you remind me what happened with the requested funding for the Adam Magoon House?
Yes, and actually, you're right. That is something that I need to add to this list, and that's an edit that is needed on this, because that should be in the same category as Art Farm.
Right, because we allocated it, right?
You did, you recommended it, and it hasn't gone to city council. So you're absolutely right. That belongs on this list. And it actually also needs to be accounted for. So I can look at the spreadsheet from last year tells me exactly which account that was intended to be subtracted from, probably undesignated fund. So I can look to see where that should be accounted for in this.
Did the owner agree to the terms?
The owner is waiting for the city to provide an appraisal, because she wants to make sure that she's fully informed and understands what the financial obligation of the CPA grant would be should she have to repay it in the future.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to arrange for that appraisal to be undertaken. So we have the preservation restriction drafted. We have a memorandum drafted that she would sign before it goes to city council, stating that she understands what all of the requirements are. So that's all of the documentation that we had agreed were needed for it to move forward. And the last piece is the appraisal.
Yeah.
So once we have all of our homework done, then we can send this to city council for approval. So thank you for that reminder.
Mhm.
I think that probably comes out of the undesignated fund budget, and I think that's about 150,000. And a little bit of housekeeping. I've been instructed since last year that we need to, whenever we want to allocate funds out of the undesignated fund balance, it has to be first appropriated to the reserve and then taken out of the undesignated fund. So when we are ready to move that project forward, maybe as soon as next month, I'll wait until, because I don't anticipate we'll send it to city council before next month. I'll ask the committee to recommend appropriating the amount of that grant to the reserve, to the Historic Preservation Reserve, so that the accounting department is able to move the money in the right place, in the right order. So then the last thing I wanted was to mention projects that have been, and I think that this is actually out of date. So I'm going to take another look at the list of projects that have been recently completed or funds turned back. Or this may actually be accurate. Projects for which funds have been turned back within the last year are the local historic district small grant program and Mission Church on Highland Ave. I feel as though that might have been the previous year. And there was a small amount, there was $2,000 that was turned back from a open space and recreation project. And I don't remember offhand what that was from. So this is a table that I need to take another look at before the final report. So the last section is looking at what might be off-cycle applications within the next year. And the off-cycle applications, the highest probability is that they might come from projects that are currently under construction, that are grants for construction. Where the projects, it was construction projects are most likely to experience budget increases and thus come back to look for additional funding. And so I looked at what are the projects that you have granted for construction that are currently open right now. Two requests for the Somerville Museum to expand the budget for the FY22 grant. It's very unlikely that you're going to see any more construction at the Somerville Museum. What you've already granted this year should be able to close out the construction for that project. Likewise, the Hispanic Association, I think, is very unlikely to come back to request more funds for their construction project because they, I think, are using as much funding as they have capacity to do construction for this year. and are able to complete that with the funds that you approved the scope change for last month. The Henry Hansen project has already come to request a budget increase, and I don't anticipate that that will have any budget increase this year to be able to complete that project. The Brown School construction, the other school construction projects are so close to completion that we won't see budget increases for those. And the Just to Start project for the window is unlikely to get started within the next grant cycle, so that they're unlikely to be looking for or to encounter a budget increase to be able to finish that project. The couple of projects that I identified that might be likely to come for additional funding, or not might be likely, but are possible candidates for requiring additional funds, might be Junction Park, Elizabeth Peabody House, and the Glen Street Community Garden. I know the city projects, Junction Park and Glen Street Community Garden, they may be, if they have budget increases, they may be able to look for other funding sources to be able to fill those gaps. In fact, I think that's already happened with these projects. So they may or may not need to supplement what they've already found within the next year. The Elizabeth Peabody House is just preparing to go out to bid for their $300,000 grant to restore the windows. So that might be a potential candidate for budget increase this year. And who knows, it may be that this could be the year for open space acquisition. We'll have to see. So there could be the potential for an off-cycle request to supplement the funds that are available in that category. Any other observations or questions about the project status updates?
I just wanted to thank you for pulling all the information together in one place. It's satisfying to look at it and sort of, you know, get the status and hear the progress and so on.
Great, thank you. So that concludes the review of or the review of the annual report.
And so that was the draft form. Do we have a final form
I
next
can
month?
I can make the edits and submit to you a final form next month, which will be posted. I don't think that there's any reason why the committee needs to vote to approve the annual report. It will just be submitted as documentation. In particular, when we submit to City Council the request for the housing adjustment, I'm going to give them this annual report to of the finances so that they can understand the analysis behind the housing adjustment request.
So just for the benefit of the committee, I think that I just really want to compliment you on behalf of the committee for, I think for a while, it wasn't tracked as carefully, you know, funds that came back and there's been a lot of cleanup on Roberta's half in terms of chasing down stalled projects or making sure that funds that are coming back into the CPA purse are getting allocated correctly or tracked correctly. So this is like, I think it's a huge step forward from even the snapshot that we had last year, which was a step forward from the year before, you know, so I it is very satisfying, Laura, to sort of see the progress and see all the projects that are sort of moving along, and to feel just more confidence that we have a real handle on the funds and where they're going. So thank you.
Thank you. It's satisfying to me too, to finally feel like I understand all of these numbers and all of the analyses. Thank you, Alan. So I just want to make sure that I capture that comment about a typo. And with that, we're
Not the comment about you being a rock star.
I'm going to put that in the what do you call it? The
Minutes.
no, I was going to say the notes, like with the on the dust cover on the dust jacket. I'm going to put that in the dust jacket notes to go along with the report. Thank you all. So with that, I'd like to turn over to the committee, your discussion about the 4 outstanding applications that you still have in front of you. And I just wanted to make an observation that the applications are basically the same as what have been in your meeting packets for the last few meetings, with the exception that I did receive a couple more estimates from Vida Real for 404 Broadway. So those estimates have been included in the appropriate section within the application. And just today, before I started the meeting, I added a letter from the Historic Preservation Commission acknowledging that the 2 historic preservation projects came before the commission last month. So I just wanted to put that acknowledgement in the application for the record.
Okay. So do we want to begin deliberation, or do we want to wait until we have the match?
The match would really affect next year's revenue. So the match, what you've appropriated this year is the funding that you have available this year. And if you underestimated, then you'd have surplus money in next year's additional revenue. And if you overestimated, heaven forbid, then that would be subtracted from the undesignated fund budget.
Okay.
I know we talked about numbers a lot, and yet, could we bring up, or just remind me of the bottom line as has potentially been adjusted from the various allotments that have been reassigned to what we are being asked? I guess that's in your draft report here. The total of the requests and how much we have to spend on them, so we know how much pencil sharpening we have to do.
Yes. So I'm going to share the screen again and show the spreadsheet.
That's right.
That lists all the projects that have been requested. So the ones that are in bold, so the ones that are already awarded are in this column. So the ones that are in bold have not yet been awarded. And those are the ones that are under discussion for tonight. The total funds available, so there's the budgeted fund, the amount that we appropriated in the spring is the budgeted amount, plus the amount that's sitting in the reserve program area reserve funds right now that you're allowed to use. So this is the total available funding that you can spend right now, and the total request. So the difference shows that the amount requested for open space and recreation is higher than the amount that's available. And so the difference shows that if you were to fund the full amount requested, you could do that by drawing 187,000 out of the budgeted reserve. The amount that's requested for historic preservation is actually a little bit less than the amount than the total available. So that leaves 123,000 still in the historic preservation reserve if you were to fund all of the projects.
Okay, so what's being requested for historic preservation, for example, still exceeds by some amount, 60-ish thousand, what we initially allocated for the year of 362,413.
Yeah.
But we have a bunch of reserves sitting there. And in the case of open space, we'd need to use up all the reserves and then dig in 187 into the budget. I gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's sort of the opposite of last year, where we had enough to cover open space and we had to dip into the reserve to cover historic preservation. So it feels balanced to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe you said this, but it's fully funding everything, right? There's no.
Rose, there's the echo.
So I think I understood what Rose said. You can give me a thumbs up if this is correct. Your question was whether this reflects fully funding everything. So yes. This is the total amount that was requested. So this is what would be left if you were to fully fund everything.
I was looking at the spreadsheet, and so the 1,390,000 that's in row 16J, J16. Is that a total of those bolded, the unfunded, or is that, because it looks like it's calculated by adding two other numbers?
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure that out.
This is the amount that we've already awarded.
Yeah.
And then this is the amount that's outstanding. The outstanding is the sum of the bolded numbers.
Okay.
It looks like financially we're able to cover the grant applications in full, should we choose to. Does anyone see, I don't know if we want to start with one project at a time, or if people want to sort of put out there any project which they feel that perhaps we shouldn't be funding or should be funding for less than the requested amount. Are there any proposals to sort of question any of the grant applications as they stand?
No, but I'm just curious. They're all, to me, they all seem like laudable things that individually, they're all good endeavors. And I remember from when I wasn't on this commission, I would get these updates from Dick Bauer. He'd come in and tell us that there are certain criteria about when you evaluate, does this project have access to other funding? Can it be phased effectively? And there was like a little laundry list of things to check off. I don't know if that was something that would get applied in all times or just in times when things were really tight and you had to find a way to stretch money out. Has that process been gone through on all of these?
So we had actually, and I didn't include this in your meeting packet this year. This is something that, you know, if you preferred, I could give this to you in next month's meeting packet so that you could review these projects through this lens. But last year I shared some evaluation criteria. And now that I think of it, I really should have included that in your meeting packet this month, so that you could think about the evaluation criteria. It was the committee's experience last year that the evaluation criteria may have been helpful theoretically, but it was difficult to really apply them. Like, it was difficult to score the projects based on the criteria because it was too subjective, because it was difficult to weigh what was really important criteria for one project versus another project with respect to all of the different evaluation criteria that were identified. So I'd be happy to share those back if you wanted to have another chance to use them, or I could pull them up if you wanted to review them right now before making a decision about these.
Why don't you pull them up for the benefit of new members who've never seen them? So last year was the first year that we tried to use a rubric. And I think Roberta sort of captured it well, where it was useful in terms of getting into the projects and looking at them and sort of, you know, thinking about all these items. But because some of the things, it was hard to have the weight of like the recommendations versus, you know, supporting Somerville, Summer Vision Plan or something like that. The weighting was not quite there, you know, in terms of one category against another. So I think we all found it kind of useful in terms of focusing ourselves, but we didn't want to be held to that rubric for our final decisions because we all had some issues with sort of how it added up at the end.
Okay.
But
so this is actually in the application materials. In the application instructions, the applicants are told that these are criteria that you're going to use in evaluating the applications. So is the application complete? Does the project align with planning goals and objectives? Does the project have support of outside groups, relevant city boards, and the public? That might be indicated by letters of support, by the involvement or partnership with different entities, or by involving a broad public process. Does the project restore, preserve, or repair existing resources, or is it a new development project? Does it have strong immediate benefit to the city, or kind of less immediate or less apparent benefits to the city? Does it have an equitable social impact? Meaning, is it located in an environmental justice neighborhood, which there's a map provided on the second page? Or is it going to be benefiting less advantaged communities or populations in the city? So those are narrative questions. And then in terms of the budget and scope, has the applicant done a great job of obtaining estimates and providing a detailed explanation of the budget, scope, and timeline? Does the project demonstrate feasibility, the capacity, having obtained approvals, funding, and other resources to show that they're ready to proceed? Have they coordinated with any other city departments that they need to involve for planning, or other entities that will be partners involved in executing the project. Will the project create a burden on the city going forward in terms of maintenance cost? Does the project have other sources of funding? So this is the one that you mentioned, Eric. It fills a partial funding gap or provides a local funding match that would not otherwise be available, so that it leverages funds from other sources? Or is it contributing funds to a project that otherwise there aren't funding sources available for? And then any other criteria that that come to mind. And then the map that identifies the environmental justice populations, which include the east and west ends of the city, kind of the east third of the city and the west border of the city. And I'm trying to think of the projects that are in the pipeline for this year, whether any of those projects are located in environmental justice neighborhoods. The Blessing of the Bay, the Kennedy School playground, I'm not sure. I think that is. The the 404 Broadway, I think, is right outside. However, it's a church that the primarily serves Spanish speaking and minority populations. So I think that would qualify in that regard. And the Somerville Museum is not within an environmental justice neighborhood. So.
A very thorough analysis there, and I can see why maybe it was a little hard to apply. I mean, to delve into for each, because there's some intuition involved too, and it's a very empirical snapshot.
Yeah. It may be that for future versions, we take the scoring out and just use this rubric as a prompt to help you think about the projects and hopefully to help the applicants think about how they can make better applications. That's the goal.
I kind of think that was what we decided last year, is we kind of used it as an informal guide, but we didn't like really strictly adhere to or try to adhere to the numeric scores, you know, that the rubric generated.
Okay.
Or at least I know, at least I did. You know, I guess I should only speak for myself.
So I'm going to bring the spreadsheet back up. And so one approach that you might consider is, are there any projects right now that you think I mean, first of all, a question is, do you want to wait a month to make recommendations? Since, you know, in our calendar, we had given ourselves more time, and you don't have to force yourselves. It's already been almost 90 minutes since we started today. So you could just say, let's come back to this next month. Or if there are any projects that you think are no-brainers that you definitely want to recommend, you could take a vote on those and spend some more time on projects that you want to look at more deeply. I suggest those two approaches that you could choose.
Did you receive any comments after? I mean, in the you know, after the hearing last, or the presentations last month?
I did not.
So if I can propose, just so we can get the ball rolling here, I think it might be a good use of time to get straight on the deal facts or the proposal facts for each of these four, so that then for those that maybe we're not comfortable with voting on tonight, if everybody is in agreement on what the facts are, then folks can go back, review that rubric that we just looked at, and come next month with a better formed opinion, and we can follow up with any questions that we have. Does that make sense? Maybe Heather?
I think so. And the other thing to think about being prepared to is like the recommendation letter where if we have any conditions that we want to put on the grantees, we have sort of a boilerplate of conditions that we've developed over time. But sometimes there needs to be something tailored for a particular project or grantee.
So if no objections, are folks okay to start with Vita Rail? That was actually the one that I was least clear on, and maybe have questions to ask of folks. Is that okay, Heather, Roberta? Okay. So just to kind of recap what I saw in this. So this is an ask for $25,000, and it's for a condition assessment to preserve their building. Originally, it was for just the exterior, right? Now it is for ADA accessibility and code assessment of the interior as well. And it is they pitched it as being safety related. So the $25,000 request was going to be to go some ways towards paying for the project. The remainder was going to be paid for by the church organization themselves, right? So they said they expected $35,000 total, $10,000 from them, $25,000 from us. So the question that we had last time was they had a proposal, but the proposal was not really the scope that they were saying that they wanted to use this for, and they were waiting for more proposals. That's what I had in my note, is they were hoping for a couple of proposals to come in. Yeah. And I see in the meeting package that 2 have come in, looks like last week. Yeah. So in looking at those, there's one that looks like it's in line with what their cost estimate was, $34,600. And I do see references to code and safety assessment scope within that proposal. Yeah. And then the other proposal sounds like it came from an architect, and it is for almost double the amount, $65,000. And I was a little confused because it didn't look like it had any scope in that related to ADA. It was exclusively for an envelope study of the exterior. That's what I saw. I'm going to stop there and see if folks had any comments or questions about that.
I would just provide a little bit of context that might be helpful for you. I did speak with the applicant about these estimates that they received, and encourage them that they can choose between the vendors that they, are the most comfortable with, who have provided estimates. So they've also reached out to several architects and contractors who have not responded to them. So obviously they wouldn't consider working with those. But of the 2 that have responded, they felt that the first one better understood what they were asking for.
Understood. So, the first one being Old Mohawk, and that's the $34,600.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is where it's nice to have more than 2. When you have like 3 proposals, you can sort of see better. But I guess I feel that it looks as though Old Mohawk did understand what they were asking for, and covered the requested services. So it is a little hard sometimes with these groups where when there's not a 3 or 4 bids, and you're trying to base it on, here we've got a high and a low, and so we have to trust that the low bidder is qualified and understands the scope. Or we don't have to trust it, we have to evaluate that.
Do we, or does anybody else among my colleagues here have a strong preference on or a feeling on whether it's more appropriate to be funding studies of the exterior versus ADA and accessibility inside the building. The reason I ask is, you know, if it's accessibility to areas that are not necessarily open to the public, if they're just for the use of kids that go to the school there or folks that are involved in a certain program or whatever, then that may be a grayer area to me than a study of the exterior, which seems very much to fit in the, you know, general public benefit of our reason for being. I don't know. I don't know if I'm on the right track there or not, but is that anybody have an opinion on that?
I do thank you, Brian, for asking that. I agree that it's the exterior, the funds being used for the exterior seems pretty straightforward. Oh, am I still echoing?
Wait, Rose,
Yeah,
do you have a phone and a computer speaker on?
No.
Seems like you have two, it feels like you have two microphones, so you're getting feedback.
Maybe if you mute your speaker while you speak and then unmute it, that might be a solution.
Okay. I don't, that's so weird.
Not it.
I'll put it in the chat.
Do you have headphones?
If
That you
you
could
just
speak through?
speak very slowly, I think we can understand you. That might be easier than putting it in the chat. So just don't talk fast. We'll get it.
Okay. I'll call from my phone.
Okay.
Have we in the past, at churches, we've funded obviously the church that isn't really a true church now, but we've done
There was
accessibility.
the yeshiva synagogue that was an accessibility project.
So, and nonprofit organizations in general have included the Somerville Museum, the Hispanic Association, the synagogue, and we've done a similar exterior plus safety assessment, code assessment of the Elizabeth Peabody House. And they haven't yet asked for an accessibility related grant, but I imagine that would likely be expected in the future.
I think to me it feels appropriate. So this is one of these areas, this is one of in preservation, this is one of the sort of gray areas of what's appropriate. And so it's something that we sort of need to determine as a committee. And I think for a while now, we've been sort of increasingly supporting sort of these stewards of these historical buildings to get these kind of assessments done, just that they would know how to prioritize it, would know what's on the first order of like things that need to happen, and would also be able to have better informed cost estimates. And then including accessibility in that as really a way of improving the way that they function and serve the public. And the public can be described as the kids that go to that nursery school, or the people who use it as a place of worship, or the museum as, you know, members of the paying public in the part of the museum, because you have to be a member to go into the museum, although they have like open days. So I think this committee's taken an increasingly sort of liberal point of view about accessibility being a an important part of historic preservation.
Rose?
And yeah, is this any better?
Yes.
Okay, I just would say that as much as we're able to be in line with whatever the city's policy is on this, I don't want to ever be in a situation where we're moving away from what the city's standard practice is. And maybe they don't really have a standard practice for these types of situations. Yeah, I don't know. We talked a little bit about this last week, Roberta and Heather.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's one thing that I would add to what you've both said, which is back in spring of 2022, when we had our public hearing for the benefit of the newer members, one of the speakers who gave testimony at the public hearing was an architect who specializes in handicap accessibility. And one of the things that he pointed out is that when an investment is made in restoring a building, the cost of that investment reaches a certain threshold compared to the value of the building, it triggers a requirement for them to come into compliance with ADA. So the CPA grant to fix the roof and the windows could actually trigger the organization's requirement to come into compliance with ADA. So I think on that basis alone, the CPC has taken on an obligation to see that a building becomes accessible.
So the obligation, it's not just the obligation for us to fund the assessment to figure out whether or not it needs to be accessible, but actually we are.
So I guess that was not very clear language, and maybe I should take back the way that I said that earlier. The organization, once they fund the improvement to the building, so, just the architectural analysis, they're not obligated to do anything. But when they actually repair the roof and the windows to the sum of $500,000 or $1 million or whatever it costs to do all of that exterior work, then the organization is obligated to make their building handicapped accessible. And if they came to us, to the CPC, because they don't have the resources to make that investment in the building themselves, then the city has put the organization in a position of being non-compliant with federal law. So the city, I mean, there's not a legal, we're not going to be legally obligated, but the city is, I think it would be unfair for the city to put the organization in that position of non-compliance if the city doesn't have the intention to be willing to back them up on becoming compliant.
Yeah.
And that's accessibility to kind of common shared spaces and resources, not so much to the third floor office. It's really to where the programming and the main entry.
That makes sense. I do think it's that is a tricky, there's a lot to that analysis though. And we should just be prepared for that. And I absolutely agree that it makes sense for us for part of the feasibility study that we are helping to fund be a code compliance, a code analysis to say, okay, this is $2 million of work that needs to be done. $1 million of it is exterior and that's CPC eligible, and $1 million of it is interior and that's not CPC eligible. And what's the piece that triggers the code, the accessibility compliance? So it is, and it's never gonna be it's never gonna be super straightforward. I don't know what my point is in saying this. I just,
In terms,
it's-
and just to, like, to put out another example, in terms of code compliance, a frequent
Mhm.
request that we've seen has been from our nonprofit organizations, has been fire safety
Yeah.
compliance as well. So we've funded a couple of fire safety projects for nonprofit organizations.
yeah.
I think in principle, I don't have any real issue with separating this notion of access, making a building accessible to the members of the public or life safety from other programmatic stuff. Like we wouldn't pay to do space planning and reconfigure offices and things like that, because that's specific to a particular use of that space. But I think general overreaching things about allowing the community to be able to get into it, or fire sprinklers or whatnot. And certainly in this case, I think since we're just looking at funding a study, which just comes up with a menu or a list of what the building really needs for what we actually fund eventually, notwithstanding, I think it's probably a good, it's suitable.
Mhm.
That's my view anyway.
I'm also very in support of accessibility. I know that some of these institutions, it's very hard for them to fund these things, and they're kind of stuck because they can't move forward on a project because they need to do accessibility, and kind of aiding in that is very helpful. I do want to say one comment about these two quotes, and one concern I have is that one of them is coming from an actual architect and one's coming from a contractor. And if we're thinking about accessibility codes, I think confirming with this contractor that they do understand the Massachusetts Accessible Board's requirements is key, because this person can come in and just say, oh, you need to remove some of these little bumps and flatten out this area, but not actually come up with a comprehensive plan of how they're going to make the place accessible, versus an architect who actually has like a certification that they understand accessibility requirements.
That's a good point.
So is there a chance?
I would encourage them to continue to try and get some more proposals before next month to Roberta.
Okay.
So I'm aware of the fact that Roberta needs to leave in about 15 minutes.
Right. Yep.
Is there anything under other business that's important to cover before?
I just wanted to invite you. It's kind of an exciting season for ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings. So I just have to look at the time, and I don't recall whether I forwarded this to the committee or not. We had a ribbon cutting yesterday at the Brown School, and a couple weeks ago at the West Somerville Neighborhood School. And I don't know if any of you were able to make the open house for the Somerville Museum. It just is, if you haven't had a chance to visit the Somerville Museum, the improvements that they've made are really beautiful, and we should be proud of them. We should be proud of ourselves for making that possible. And we have one more groundbreaking coming up next week. That is at 2 p.m. at 5 Palmer Ave. That is for the Glen Park Community Garden Project.
On what day? I'm sorry.
Now you've got the echo, but we can understand. That's Monday, the 20th.
All right.
And I must not forget that next month is actually the month that we've been talking about when we need to elect new officers for next year. So that will be on the agenda next month.
All right.
And that's all I've got for other business today.
All right. I guess either we conclude the meeting here or we use the balance of the time that we have, the next 10 minutes, to discuss any other proposal or facts and questions, or shall we, maybe we should just conclude it and then pick up our deliberations next meeting. How's that sound? Okay. Can I have a motion to close the meeting?
Conclude this meeting.
Okay, so that's from John. And a second,
I'll second it.
and Eric seconded.
All right, then I will call the roll. Eric,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and Joe.
Yes.
Thank you all. Have a very good night.
So we don't
Well-
really need a new meeting packet for next month. We could just continue to use the same link, and you could put that rubric in there so people have it.
I'll send out a new meeting packet because it keeps it clean for me. Then I have records of what my
Okay.
meeting pack. So I'll just probably copy paste, but I'll add the rubric, and I might have some additional things to share. So
Okay,
you'll look for a new link for me.
okay.
And next month's meeting is on December 13. So it's also a little bit outside of our usual schedule.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So December 13th, we will see you all then. And thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Good
Good night.
Good night. all.